legal.
Retired Commissioner Rowena Guanzon slams the COMELEC's Oplan Baklas, which removes campaign posters in private properties.
The campaign posters are the properties of the owners who posted them on their private properties. Therefore, the right to use the said property is protected by the said provision of the Constitution.
Even though the COMELEC allows the posting of materials on private property, it is still with the caveat that size requirements have to be adhered to.
Lawyers and election watchdogs called out the Commission on Elections for taking down campaign materials on private property, saying that every citizen's right to participate in the elections also extends to the right to campaign. The campaign of one candidate is considering legal actions against the COMELEC. But what are the rules on election campaign materials? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to this Thursday edition of The Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao. Also with us is Ana Marie Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. And joining us in a while, I suppose, is Lucy Cruz Valdez, the head of News 5. Hi, Ami.
Good evening.
Happy Thursday.
Yes, happy Thursday.
Oh, anong malaking story ng Philippine Star?
Alam mo no, nagsasama-sama na ngayon yung dalawang malalaking issue, yung politics and public health. Sabi ng Department of Health, ayaw nilang mais ng COMELEC yung mga campaign rules on health protocols.
Okay.
So, tingnan natin kung ano nangyayari.
Also, I suppose, sabi ng Octa Research, mukhang may Valentine's Day spike.
Mukhang nga meron daw, binabantayan nila, mukhang, well, yun yung Valentine, paano pa itong mga kampanya? So, iniintay din natin yan.
Although si Secretary Duque was disputing that, sabi ni Secretary Duque, teka, 2 araw pa lang since Valentine's, so hindi pa dapat counted yan as a Valentine's Day spike. So I suppose that means it was a pre-Valentine's Day spike.
Yes.
And you know what that means. Sarap ng tawa niya. Okay. Okay, let's move on to our first guest for tonight. Of course, among other things, we want to talk about yung pagbabaklas, yung Oplan Baklas ng COMELEC, which is getting controversial and getting a lot of mileage, especially on the legal front. So we begin tonight with election lawyer, Attorney Emil Marañon III. Attorney Marañon, thank you for joining us and welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening, Atty.
Good evening po sa inyong lahat at saka sa nakikinig ng inyong programa po.
Yes, sir. As you wrote I think in Rappler in 2016, you wrote about yung Supreme Court decision on the Bacolod Diocese and its right to post a bigger campaign paraphernalia than what was allowed by the COMELEC. Pero sige, before we get to that, let me start off with something very, very basic. In the past ba, naging problema na ito? Itong COMELEC going into private property and pulling down campaign materials. Ilabas muna natin po yung yung Bacolod case kasi sabi ng iba, it's a special case eh. Yung klarong-klarong election paraphernalia, dati na bang nagbabaklas ang COMELEC sa private property?
Opo, so this has been an enduring issue, recurring issue actually every elections. So one of the earliest and most important cases, of course, the Adyong versus COMELEC, the question on whether can you post election paraphernalia in a private car or in a private property. So the Supreme Court there ruled in favor of free speech. So sinabi niya na the moment magdikit ka ng campaign paraphernalia in your own private property, that is an extension of your right to express yourself in relation to the issues relating to sa election. And the next one, for example, another one is Juan Utak versus COMELEC. Again, on the issue of whether pwede ka ba maglagay ng election paraphernalia in public utility vehicles. And the Supreme Court, again, ruled in favor of free speech. So sabi doon, dapat allowed daw. Because may karapatan naman sila magpahayag na kanilang suporta or opposition to a particular candidate. So in 2015, eto na nga po yun yung Diocese of Bacolod versus COMELEC, where the issue, specifically on the size of the election paraphernalia, became like the focal point po of this discussion before the Supreme Court.
So ano nga yung kinalabasan nun? Maybe you can remind us kung ano nga yung issue, saka ano ang kinalabasan.
Okay. So actually in 2015, it was actually during the 2013 elections.
Yes.
I was still actually in the COMELEC. So I was the one actually involved in prosecuting yung pari doon po sa Bacolod because it was at the height of the discussion of the RH law. So the Catholic Church made a very strong stand before na opposing the passage of the RH bill. So ang pari po doon sa Bacolod, nalagay po siya ng malaking poster nakasulat Team Buhay at saka Team Patay. So yung Team Buhay, these are actually the senators who are running for the election but voted against the RH bill. On the other hand, yung Team Patay, ito po yung bumoto in favor of the RH bill which later became the RH law. So ang nangyari actually doon is that the COMELEC issued a notice. Yung sabi namin at the time, I was still in COMELEC, yung sabi namin, tanggalin nyo yan because it exceeds the maximum size of 2 feet at 2 by 3 feet, which is provided in the Fair Elections Act.
Yeah.
Ang nangyari ngayon, they refused to remove the poster. So ang ginawa ngayon ng former boss ko, si Sixto Brillantes, is they actually filed an election offense case against the priest in Bacolod for actually not heeding the notice to remove. And that priest actually went up straight to the Supreme Court questioning the legality of the action of COMELEC. And in that decision written by Justice Leone, it was there that yung sinabi po ng Korte Suprema na if an expression is made by a private citizen, it is outside of the regulatory reach of the COMELEC. Meaning po kahit lumagpas ng 2 feet by 3 feet as in the case of that priest in Bacolod, hindi po ito violation ng batas because nga po this is considered as protected speech. So klaro po doon yung Supreme Court that they made two categories. Either you belong to the category of candidates, political parties, franchise holders, which means nasakop po kayo ng regulatory powers ng COMELEC. On the other hand, if you are a private citizen, sinasabi doon na hindi po kayo sakop or saklaw ng kapangyarihan ng COMELEC na i-regulate tuwing election po.
Sir, para
So
klaro lang
meaning,
po.
meaning kung sa bahay mo, kahit gaano kalaki, meron bang ganong restriction sa size? Kahit gaano kalaki, pwede ko bang kubutan yung bahay ko ng campaign material? Or halimbawa, may warehouse ako o may negosyo na open to the public but it's a private property. Pwede ko bang lagyan yun ng campaign material, any size that I want?
Based sa discussion ng Diocese of Bacolod, if you really believe in that candidate and in pursuit of your advocacy, you want to put a poster na ganun kalaki po, then you are perfectly allowed by the Constitution to do that. So as simple as that, because nga hindi kayo sakop ng 2 by 3 feet na regulation ng COMELEC. So ganun kasimple po ang rule ng COMELEC ganun kasimple ang rule na nilatag ng Korte Suprema doon. So it is within your right po to actually put a poster which is as big as you want. The reason for that is very simple. Ang size kasi ng poster is related po doon sa inyong right to free speech. Because right, for example, if you put a small poster 2 by 3 feet and malayo po yung bahay ninyo sa highway, then hindi po affected po yung visibility ng gusto nyo sabihin, hindi nakikita ng tao. So in other words, it has to be context-based, but at the same time, dapat i-consider din po yung mga yung konteksto at saka kung ano gusto mo sabihin and those other matters. But then again, the Supreme Court was very clear, if you are a private citizen, hindi ka po sakop ng regulatory powers ng COMELEC.
Sir, just to be clear, Bale, what you're saying is that, at least from your interpretation of the Supreme Court ruling, is that itong 2 by 3 poster size limitation only applies to, number 1, public common poster areas. Yun po, malinaw yun. Number 2, tell me if I'm getting this right, Number 2, private property basta hindi ka kandidato o political party. I get that from what you were saying kanina na ibang private citizen versus yung candidate o political party na saklaw ng COMELEC. So, ibig mong sabihin po, pag ikaw ay kandidato o political party, hindi ka sakop nitong exemption na ito sa private property.
Okay. We have to distinguish, there are 2 regulations in this. Number 1, as regards the size.
Opo.
So if you are a candidate, for example, you are mandated by law that the maximum size of poster that you can actually print, for example, or distribute must be 2 by 3 feet.
Yes, sir.
The second regulation is as regards where you can put it.
Yes, sir.
So ang sinasabi doon, there are only 2 places where you can put it. Number 1, it's in the common poster area. And number 2, doon po sa private property provided that there is consent on the part of the private owner. So on the part naman po ng private citizen, hindi po saklaw again ng rules na ito, yung kung hindi ka naman po kandidato, hindi ka political party. So, ganun po kaklaro yung categorization ng Korte Suprema doon tayo sa Bacolod case.
Okay, halimbawa, meron kaming grupo sa neighborhood namin na meron kaming gustong isang kandidato. Nag-set up kami sa warehouse, private property, ng parang headquarters namin na kakaroon kami ng activities to encourage support for the candidate.
Parang volunteer.
Tapos lagay kami sa labas ng mga campaign posters na mahigit sa dinidefine na size. Sakop ba yun ng COMELEC?
Yes, again, it is protected speech on your part. So guaranteed po yan ng Constitution. And ang sabi nga po ng Korte Suprema sa Diocese of Bacolod versus COMELEC, yung karapatan niyo po or your freedom of expression is actually greater compared to the regulatory concerns ng COMELEC. So in other words po, it is within your right, constitutional right, guaranteed by the Constitution to actually do that.
Sir,
Kung provincial headquarters ng party, yun, sakop yun ng COMELEC. Hindi pwede yun.
Pag-registered po na headquarters. So again, when we talk about headquarters, pag official, ito po yung nirerehistro sa COMELEC. But pag unofficial po, for example, mga volunteers lang, hindi po yan technically headquarters. But
Yes, sir.
under the law, if that is, kung magpo-fall dun siya sa category ng headquarters, you are allowed to put actually one signboard up to 3 by 8 feet.
Yeah.
So mas malaki po yung ina-allow dun sa headquarters.
Pero sir, doesn't this effectively emasculate the COMELEC's authority to regulate sizes, except for the common poster areas? In effect, bale, walang size restrictions sa labas ng common poster areas basta na sa private property.
Ang sinasabi naman natin doon po, if for example, yung nagdikit ng poster ay yung kandidato, regardless of whether sa common poster area or sa private property, sakop po ito ng size requirement ng COMELEC.
So yun po, yun ang exemption bale. Kung ikaw ay kandidato or political party, hindi ka exempted doon sa private property rule.
That is correct po.
Okay.
Okay.
Pero sir,
Kapag nag-violate ka, ano naman ang naghihintay na penalty? Kasi tatanggalin lang naman yung mga campaign materials mo. May napaparusahan ba? Saka ano yung parusa?
Actually, it will constitute as an election offense under 261 po, I mean 262 of the Omnibus Election Code and in relation to Republic Act 9006 po. So, ang penalty po nito is 1 year to 6 years imprisonment po. But, ang in-explain niya namin parate is hindi actually automatic na porque oversize yung poster ninyo ay automatic po na nag-violate na kayo ng batas. Kasi when you read the regulation of COMELEC, which is Resolution 10730, sinasabi po doon na merong 3 days pa na ibig sabihin ang proseso is if nakita ng COMELEC na oversized or misplaced yung poster is magpapadala muna sila ng sulat. So in that letter, actually, you have 3 days to either contest or reason out why your poster is not illegal and should not be removed. So ang lahat ng instances natin actually na nakikita na problema, hindi po dumaan sa proseso na to. Kasi that is the due process which is actually provided by the rules by the COMELEC.
Pero sir, at the same time, the COMELEC makes a point when it says that yung Bacolod Diocese case in 2015 was a case of advocacy, not necessarily that of campaign paraphernalia or campaign propaganda. That being it was an advocacy by the priests against the reproductive health bill and not necessarily in relation to or direct relation to the election itself.
We have to consider actually that the context of that case is that Team Buhay is actually promoting the candidates, and Team Patay are actually discouraging the parishioners
Yes.
from voting those re-electionists. So yung context
in a way, it's a
ng election
campaign.
pa rin.
In a way, it's a campaign for and against certain
Exactly.
candidates.
Yes, and of course, we have to consider ano pang ibig sabihin ng advocacy. So, kung pinaglalaban mo ba yung kandidato because naniniwala ka sa values na nire-represent niya, hindi ba advocacy yun? So again, it's a question of ano yung scope ng advocacy na tinatawag natin. And mahirap for me, and in case of doubt, it should be resolved in favor of free speech.
Mm-hmm.
So kung merong specified na time period, you were saying 3 days, hindi pwedeng basta-basta papasok yung mga tao sa private property, kahit sa out beyond the gate lang, no? Para tanggalin yung mga campaign material, hindi pwede yan.
Ako, very simple kasi po yan. No matter how apparent na oversize yan or may violation, pag hindi po dumaan sa proseso, it's still presumed valid and legal. Because, right, for example, kung hindi tayo dadaan sa due process or sa proseso, that would mean that anyone can just remove posters, as simple as that. But yun nga po precisely yung procedure or due process doon na nilalagay sa rules ng COMELEC na sinasabi na bigyan niyo muna ng pagkakataon na mag-reason out yung may-ari ng poster rather than just arbitrarily removing it. So yun po yung naging problema natin is because most of these instances where we have seen abuses, they have not gone through the process of this as provided in Resolution 10730.
Mm-hmm. Sir, this question of mine, I think falls on the gray line. I don't know exactly whether it's private property or not. Pero for example, kasi madaling sabing private property pag nasa loob ng bakuran mo, o pag nasa loob ng bahay mo, nasa loob ng warehouse mo, clearly that's private property. Pero for example, meron kang pader, magpaskil ka ng paraphernalia doon sa pader mo facing the street. What is that exactly? Is that within your private property or already outside in public? The same with, for example, mga painting. If you paint a mural, and we saw that, nag-viral nga isang photo na the COMELEC in Isabela was painting over a mural of one candidate because it was on a wall facing the street. So yung mga ganun po, what is that exactly?
Yung test po is very simple. It's a test of ownership. If you own that wall, if ikaw gumastos para ipatayo yun, if it is standing in your lot, it is your property. It is your private property. No matter of whether exposed yan na dadaanan ng tao, it doesn't matter. It's a question of ownership. If it's yours, then it's a private property. And then if it's a private property, may karapatan po kayo na maglagay ng posters doon ng sino man sinusuportahan nyo na kandidato.
So even if it is facing the street, for example, yung bangketa, basta pader mo, pananagutan mo yun at pag-aari mo yun.
Oh, it doesn't matter. And that's precisely po the point of free speech. You want to be seen, you want to be heard. Di ba? Kasi kung ikaw lang naman nakakakita o nakakarinig ng expression mo, then what's the point? Di ba? And yun precisely yung point ko bakit ang sabi nga ng Supreme Court sa Diocese of Bacolod, even the size is outside of the regulatory reach of the COMELEC precisely because it is related to the content. Kasi kung sobrang liit yan na hindi mabasa, hindi makita ng tao, then what's the point na nagsalita ka pa? Or that you express yourself? So that is why it is crucial po, yung in terms of size. So that was the discussion, the very clear discussion of the Supreme Court in that case.
Paano kung pamilya ko may-ari ng shopping mall na malaki? Pwede ko bang pinturahan yung pader ng shopping mall ng mukha ko sa yung mga kasama ko sa slate?
Very clear naman po doon. Again, ang test ng Supreme Court, if it's a private property, you are not a candidate, there is no collusion between you and the candidate, then parte po yun ng karapatan po ng isang private property owner.
No, kung ako mismo yung kandidato and my family owns the mall.
If you are a candidate po, again, eto na po yung pumapasok ng regulatory powers ng COMELEC. If you are a candidate or belonging to a political party, then by all means you need to comply with all the laws, the Omnibus Election Code, the Fair Elections Act, and the moment you violate that, that will constitute an election offense.
So hindi ko pwedeng pinturahan yung pader ng mall ko?
Hindi po.
Okay.
Because nga na-candidate kayo and you must comply with the 2 feet by 3 feet. So again, the categorization is very simple. Sino ba yung gumagawa ng speech? Are you a candidate or are you a private citizen?
Ayun nga, parang sa GR 205728, that was very specific in the Supreme Court ruling na in the case of the Bacolod Diocese, they were not even candidates for the elections. So their rights to free speech are protected by the Constitution. Pero sir, teka, so paano po to? In the end, anong mangyayari? I mean, you have COMELEC saying one thing on one hand and you have, of course, the candidates saying another thing. Sinong mananaig? Will it have to go again to the Supreme Court?
Well, of course, ang lahat ng apektado po, may karapatan sila na questionin again to sa Supreme Court. And I will not be surprised if people will actually go up to the Supreme Court once again. Because notwithstanding the very clear policy of the Supreme Court in that case, not only in the Diocese of Bacolod, but even in Adyong versus COMELEC, very persistent pa rin po ang policy ng COMELEC to actually remove posters by private citizens. So, even po, for example, sinasabi nila na, ang statement ng COMELEC, it must be advocacy-based. But did they ever distinguish between advocacy-based posters ng private citizens at hindi? I don't think so. So one thing is very clear. There has been a violation and I think dapat marunong naman sana makinig yung COMELEC kung may reklamo po yung tao. Because again, in terms, ang sabi nga ng Korte Suprema, if ang naglalaban or yung in conflict is yung right to free speech ng private citizen and yung regulatory powers ng COMELEC, then actually the right to free speech po should prevail. Yun po yung outcome, not just in the Diocese of Bacolod case, the One Utak case, in the Adyong case. It is always the right to free speech, freedom of expression that triumphs over regulation. Very simple.
Well, apart from the controversy on the interpretation, isa pang problema natin is the enforcement. Kumusta naman ang track record natin in penalizing violators of these rules? Marami na bang nakahuli, naparusahan? Do you have any, kahit ano lang, yung ballpark figure kung ilan na kaya yun?
Well, I cannot answer that for COMELEC, but perhaps James Jimenez can answer that question. But ang punto natin dito po is again, very simple. Ang dami pong problema natin in terms of elections. There are so many issues that we need to face. And I think this should be the least of the problem of the COMELEC na dapat magtuunan ng pansin. So, ang atin lang is hindi ito po yung dapat iniisip natin, but how do we actually protect our elections, make it orderly, and ma-retain po yung tiwala ng taong bayan. Because for example, if you have a problem in implementing a rule or a regulation, then na-erode po yung trust ng publiko sa COMELEC. And of course, elections is founded on trust. Kung wala pong tiwala yung taong bayan sa COMELEC, then that becomes a problem because that extends to their trust to the election system.
Sir, pasingit lang isa po. Well, I do understand your point na meron namang, there's always recourse, a legal recourse, which is go back to the Supreme Court and have them rule on this again. But the last time they did that, it took them 2 years. At 2 years after election, mag-election. Next year na yung 2016 elections eh. So that basically rendered it moot and academic.
Aware in that case po, I think the Supreme Court issued a TRO against COMELEC para itigil po yung prosecution ng isang pari po doon sa Bacolod. But then again, sa akin nga hindi na dapat umabot po sa Supreme Court yan because COMELEC of course should be aware and should learn to listen po sa taong bayan because if the people find it objectionable, then baka panahon na po na i-review natin yung policy natin. Baka it's time to go back to the drawing board and examine kung ano ba ang dapat na approach dito. Paano natin iti-train yung field officers natin kung paano ma-implement to in accordance not only with the rules but even with the constitutional rights of private citizens.
Okay. Well, maraming salamat po. That was election lawyer Emil Marañon III. Sir, thank you for joining us tonight.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you,
ingat po.
Attorney.
Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back. And welcome back to Chiefs on One News. And now joining us is COMELEC spokesman, Director James Jimenez. Sorry, sir. Sometimes we call you attorney, sometimes we call you commissioner. Director James Jimenez joins us. Sir, thank you for joining us. Of course, I'm sure you heard Attorney Marañon speak his mind, and that's his point of view. But we'd like to get COMELEC's point of view, especially po, what does COMELEC have in mind now na may mga umaalbang kandidato? Is COMELEC going to pursue its Oplan Baklas?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that not the whole of Baklas is objectionable.
Opo.
Oo, di ba? May mga areas naman ng Baklas na I think we all agree is necessary and has to be continued. But yes, there is significant pushback dito sa treatment ng private property. And siguro nga tama rin na tingnan natin. Let's look at it a little closer. The COMELEC has been operating on a set of assumptions that, of course, COMELEC is not monolithic naman. COMELEC is not unresponsive to legal opinions, etc. We have our own, we've been operating under a certain interpretation of Diocese of Bacolod, which, as I'm sure you've already heard, is really at odds with almost everyone else's opinion right now. At least almost everyone else who is vocal right now. We don't know how widespread really that belief is. But anyway, again, as far as those aspects of it are concerned, siguro nga mas maganda kung medyo step back tayo ng konti. Ultimately, our election officers and our provincial officers are basically committed to not entering private property without consent. No, hindi kami nananalakay ng property. And in the examples that we've seen today, particularly in places like Isabela, I have heard from our officers, the ones who are actually on the ground and did it, that they had the consent of the owners. Okay, that they had the consent of the owners, and that they were actually discussing it with the owners. Those who didn't immediately consent, binigyan po sila ng parang summary, no, kung ano magiging next steps natin dyan, which is again what Attorney Marañon said. We give notice, and then if after notice hindi pa rin tatanggalin, then may posibilidad na kakasuhan. So, like I said, just to bring it all around, no, there are parts of Baklas that I think should continue. There are things about Baklas that are not really objectionable. But as far as those that are getting pushed back now, COMELEC is not averse to listening to other opinions.
So you're saying that you are seeing gray areas in your rules na matagal na naman in place, ano? Are you seeing areas there that need nuancing or fine-tuning? Kasi nakita namin kanina mukhang, from the video, kahit sabihin nyo na may consent, mukhang sinalakay talaga sila eh. Yun ang lumalabas din sa ano.
Yes, sir. And let me add to that, sir. Yes, sir.
Mga government personnel yung pumasok.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sir, let me add to that, sir.
Ma'am Amy, sir, sandali lang, no? Kasi yung video na nakita nyo, I'm guessing that's the video that's on social, right?
Yes.
So that's a snippet. Opo, that's a snippet of what actually happened. The team that actually went there, they were documenting themselves. So we have the other point of view document there, no? And makita mo na mahaba yung kwentuhan, they ended up laughing about it, etc. So it was not necessarily a confrontational event, no? But again, this is subject to interpretation by whoever is watching the video. Pero yun po, as far as seeing nuances, I mean, of course there are always nuances, and thus far we have been very confident in our explanations, except that we want to give full benefit, of course, to other opinions that are coming up. Hindi naman natin pwedeng ma-dismiss out of hand yan. So, again, COMELEC is not averse to looking at those other opinions.
Sir, just to be clear, sir, so what you're saying now is that COMELEC, as a matter of policy and as a rule, will no longer try to enter private property without express consent.
We never have, sir. We never have.
Yeah. Well, sir,
I'm just making a point. I'm just making a point that hindi po talaga namin practice ang pumasok sa isang private property nang walang paalam. No, palagi naman po 'yan tinatanong. Ang napagtutuunan natin ng pansin dito yung kawalan ng notice ng 3 days, no? Okay, but as far as entering property without consent, that doesn't happen po. Hindi kami pumapasok. In fact, pag hindi namin matuntun yung property owner, kuminsan nagpo-post pa kami dun sa mismong property. So, usually talaga, well, as a matter of practice, we do go in there.
Yes, sir. Well,
With
sir,
consent.
I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, sir, baka debatable din yung question ng consent kasi may consent na binibigay dahil napilitan sila o dahil akala nila kailangan ibigay yung consent doon sa COMELEC dahil may kasama kayong PNP, armado kayo, and may threat of course the COMELEC resolution being used against you. So it's not exactly come on in and do what you want. It's more of
No, but,
ganun ba
sir,
talaga?
but
Yan ang magagawa natin.
But consent doesn't have to be like cheerfully, like cheerful consent. Ganun ba yun?
Yes,
Yun ba
sir.
ang standard
No, sir.
na ina-apply natin?
No,
Kasi
no, sir.
parang hindi naman yan eh. The thing is, hindi pinilit, and if you're giving the person basically a summary of what's gonna happen if things don't go a certain way, then would that be coercive? Again, tama po kayo. That would be debatable. I understand totally. But again, as a matter of principle, we do seek consent.
Yes, sir. Well, just to be clear, sir, just to be clear for future reference, so pag sinabi ng private property owner ngayon na hindi pwede, you have to come back with some sort of a court order before you can enter, and then that will stand.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. If the property owner is adamant and refuses entry, hindi kami papasok.
Okay.
And kailangan talaga yung 3 days. Required yun at 3 days. There is that period.
Actually, ma'am, yung 3 days notice is really to discover who owns the property, no? That's in fact one of the justifications for tearing down materials kahit na sinasabi nung owner or sinasabi nung politiko na hindi akin 'yan. 'Di ba? Kasi I'm sure you've pointed it out yourselves a lot of times na you confront a politico with an illegal poster and they will say hindi ako 'yan, ginawa ng kalaban ko 'yan.
Yeah.
And so we give them notice, right? And the theory there is if you give them notice and they still don't take it down, then they are the beneficial owners of that. Kanila yan, and therefore they can be held accountable. So what happens if the person admits right then and there na kanya yan? So essentially, inaamin niya na kanya yung illegal material. So are we supposed to wait 3 days before he decides, I want to follow the law or not? So yun po yung yun yung marami sigurong tama kayo. Maraming room for clarification. But that's how it falls out, right? I mean, the 3-day notice is also a means to discover kung kanino ba talaga yan. And that was exactly why it was instituted, if I'm not mistaken. So that the excuse of candidates na hindi akin yan gets short-circuited, essentially, if they don't act on it. So if they don't act on it, the presumption is kanila yan, and therefore we can take it down and hold them accountable.
Well, sir, let me bring in one more possibly troublesome case that may be hounding us in the future. Kasi kahit pa paano medyo malinaw yung nasa loob ng bakuran mo dahil, di ba, private property, pumasok ka sa bahay ko, hindi pwede, di ba? Medyo malinaw yun eh. And this is something we also raised with Attorney Maranyon kanina eh. Paano kung bakod mo at nandun sa labas ng bakod mo, well, nakapaskil sa bakod mo pero nasa labas facing the bangketa, yung oversized campaign materials. Well, as far as Attorney Maranyon is concerned, if it's your wall, it's private property and it cannot be touched. I'm wondering po if there's any decision by the COMELEC on cases like that naman. Kasi siyempre, ano yun eh, parang nasa bangketa ba yan o nasa ano ba yan?
Well, that specific formulation, sir, hindi naman yan talaga na pag-uusapan because as far as the COMELEC is concerned, the rules are pretty clear. If it's not a common poster area, then it's illegal material, right? It's illegal material. So the question now is, kung private property yan pero facing the wall, parang hindi ko pa naririnig na naging issue yung visibility niyan in terms of whether or not it's illegal material. The mere fact that it's not in a common poster area, it is already illegal material. The mere fact that it is out of size makes it illegal material. Again, whether ang impact nung placement on private property. Again, yan yung siguro maganda tignan ngayon. But as far as that particular formulation of the question, I don't see that there should be a question. As long as it is not in a common poster area, it is illegal.
Halimbawang bahay ko, can I put a mural on my wall, perimeter wall?
There, perimeter wall.
Yan nga po yung issue na sinasabi niya, no? Sinasabi natin.
Mural, hindi streamer. Mural, pinturahan ko. Pwede ba yun?
Yun nga po yung ginawa kanina. Yun yung ginawa sa Isabela, di ba? Mural po yun.
Yeah.
At nag-judgment call yung ating field officer na illegal campaign material. Kaya nga niya pinapinturahan with consent of the owner. In fact, the owner was saying, pwedeng pink na lang ang ipintura niyo imbis na white. So, so there was consent. But yan nga po yung punto no? At the time, the judgment call was that it was illegal material.
I will ask you again kasi tinanong ko na to kanina. Halimbawa, there's a group of us supporting a particular candidate. Hindi naman kami member ng party, basta gusto lang namin mag-endorse ng candidate. We get together, siguro mga 10 kami. We use a house, tapos mag-display kami doon ng kung ano-anong campaign material. Sakop ba kami ng mga regulations ninyo? We are not registered as a campaign hub or whatever.
Headquarters.
Actually, Ma'am Amy, yan nga po yung pino-point out natin. Yung consequence yan nung interpretasyon ng ilang quarters doon sa diocese. Because if you interpret diocese that way as saying that because it's private property, wala nang regulation at all, then that is the necessary implication. If I am a candidate, I'll find myself a rich donor, a rich sponsor, and I'll paint his entire building whatever color I want. And so you're unbalancing the playing field. You're basically saying, paramihan lang tayo ng rich friends niyan. Di ba? Kaya nga po, sa tingin namin, doon sa diocese, nagkaroon ng pagka-qualify na hindi ko alam bakit ini-ignore ng ibang tao. No? Ng pagka-qualify na kapag advokasya lamang nag-a-apply yung kaso na yon. Kasi nga, yung team patay, team buhay na issue, advokasya po yun. But anyway, tama po kayo, Ma'am Ami, no? Problematic situation yung dinidescribe ninyo. And certainly, yan ang magiging konsekwensya kung ganyan ang interpretasyon natin sa diocese na just because it's my private property, I can do whatever I want with it. No limits, no nothing. Yan po ang consequence.
Sir, if you don't mind, sir, we just need to go into a quick gap, but we'd like you to stay with us. Maiksi lang to. So please do stay with us, and we will be right back. So we'll pause for a break. We will continue our conversation in a few minutes. Welcome back to the Chiefs. We continue our conversation with Comelec Spokesman Director James Jimenez. Sir, I do understand completely your point. Kasi nga, if we follow one particular line of interpretation, in effect, the Comelec is emasculated of any authority to regulate anything that is outside of a public area. In effect, basta wala ka sa pampublikong lugar, pwede kang magpaskil ng kahit anong size at kahit yung trapal mo kasing laki ng 10-story building.
Yes.
But yun nga, that also does raise that question of paano nga ngayon yan? how do we resolve this in the end? Will it have to go to court to decide on whether private property is covered by the size limitations?
Okay. Again, sir, subject to whatever revisiting COMELEC may choose to do on this issue, I think the answer is very clear in Diocese of Bacolod, where Diocese of Bacolod actually says that there is a species of speech that is open to regulation. Sabi niya, malinaw na yan. I can show you the provision if you want, but it basically says that if the speech has for its subject essentially just the declarative statement to vote for someone, right? Like a campaign poster, for example, that's open to regulation. I mean, of course, there's limits to what you can regulate as to space and time, not content, for example. And that's fair. Pero malinaw yung distinction. Just as malinaw din na hindi naman pangkaraniwang poster yung pinag-uusapan sa diocese. Ang pinag-uusapan sa diocese ay pagpapahayag ng opinion ng simbahan at the time or nung diocese, no?
Yes, sir.
Na ayaw niya sa mga team patay, team buhay, ganyan. Kaso hindi yan ang sitwasyon dito eh. No? In fact, those are exactly the words of the court. That is not the case here, referring to political campaign posters and team patay, team buhay. This is not the case here. In this case, for our case now, we're talking about posters, di ba? Posters lang. Hindi naman to declaration of any advocacy.
Pero sir, isn't any campaign or isn't any electoral propaganda an expression of advocacy? And at the same time, yung team, I'm just playing the devil's advocate here. And at the same time, the Team Buhay, Team Patay advocacy, isn't that an advocacy to vote for or against specific candidates?
Well, I think that's what the decision was trying to point out. No, na this is an expression of what the church wants its parishioners to be thinking about. It's sort of like a prompt for them to consider, rather than saying to people, vote for this people, vote for that people. The church, in that case, is saying, think about this, and this is what we think about it. But you're free to make your own decision. So again, advocacy. Right? Advocacy, where you distinguish that, at least in my mind, from a poster that has the image of a person and says, their name or says vote for or whatever. That doesn't say anything. It just says that you support this person. Does it mean that you support their advocacies as well? You could interpret it that way, but that's stretching it a little, right? I mean, that's an assumption that is not really clear. That's not really something that will always be 100%. People can support people that they don't advocate for, right? I mean, okay, we're going into semantics now, I guess, and using different connotations for the word advocate, but I think you get my point.
Yeah. Well, Director, I'll repeat another question I asked kanina, no? You have rules that you have to enforce. Kumusta naman po yung track record ng COMELEC in penalizing violators? Kasi tuwing eleksyon naman, nakakakita kami ng lahat ng puno, lahat ng poste, punong-puno ng campaign materials. We definitely know na yun, bawal yun. Pati yung linya ng kuryente may nakasabit.
Yes po.
Ang track record natin in penalizing violators?
Well, penalizing, it's a little spotty because medyo dumadaan po tayo sa courts, no? In fact, one of our commissioners in an earlier incarnation as a COMELEC officer actually filed almost 300 cases for illegal postering, no? And those are pending. So, kinasuhan niya, dinala sa korte, kaso pending, hindi pa maparusahan. So yung sinasabi natin kanina na kung minsan naabot tayo ng 2 taon, that's a very real problem po. Kaya nga, meron tayong abatement, no? O yung tinatanggal natin. Kasi kung hindi man natin maparusahan, at least hindi natin hinahayaan yung flagrant violation ng batas.
May naparusahan na ba in the first place?
I have to look that up, Ma'am Ami, kasi again, ang alam ko, in recent memory, wala akong natatandaang naparusahan for illegal postering. Pero marami tayong natatanggal at may marami tayong nakakasuhan.
Okay, sir.
Walang penalty kahit dun sa candidate?
Again, outcome po ng kaso yan. Pero I think in some cases, accountability goes up very high.
Sir, again to your point kanina, hindi naman lahat ng Oplan Baklas controversial. I'd like to talk about the other uncontroversial parts of Oplan Baklas. For example, I suppose by this time, klaro na dapat sa taong bayan na bawal magpaskil sa mga puno, mga poste, at sa mga, actually kahit saan sa public area.
No,
Kahit
you'd
saan
be
sa public
surprised.
area, except for itatawag na common poster area.
Yes, you'd be surprised though that a lot of people seem to think that they can get away with
Yes.
not following that rule. No, in fact, one of the things that's gaining traction on social media right now is the proposal that you make a bunch of 2x3 posters and then just collage them into a big poster, di ba? Para technically 2x3 yung bawat individual poster, but when you put them all together, they spell someone's name, no? And unfortunately, this is also very explicitly against the rules. Takot lang ako, hindi ko alam paano to explain sa kanila yan, no? But I am trying to explain it to them. So, ganun po. So, whether or not they know, it seems that for a lot of persons, this is simply an inconvenience.
Paano yung I'll go back to a question that was raised earlier and I think there was jurisprudence on this but I'm not sure exactly how it applies Paano yung mga private cars? Paano yung mga PUVs? Mga bus, for example. I don't recall seeing that in 10730
Taxi.
Okay, meron tayong ginawang provisions diyan na batay sa regulations ng LTFRB, yung Franchise Regulatory Board, is that they allow the posting of these materials on public utility vehicles except doon sa mga bintana. Okay? Kung saan makakasagabal siya. So it's a lot more lenient, I think, this rule kasi nga pinapayagan namang lagyan. Huwag lang matatakpan yung mga bintana.
Sa PUV yan, pero paano yung kotse? Walang yung COMELEC sa kotse ko?
That would apply, sir. That would apply. If it applies to the PUVs, that should apply to private vehicles. Basta wag lang siya matatakpan yung ating mga bintana.
Yung likod ng bus, yung malaking window sa likod ng bus. Kasi marami ko nakikitang gano'n
Opo, dati maraming ganon. But in 2019, I think there was an operation to strip those stickers. At nasunod naman po yun. Oo. So tinanggal po yun, nilagay dun sa ilalim ng bintana.
So bawal pala yun?
Yes po.
Okay. Well, there's another story sa COMELEC. It's about the health protocols during campaign sorties. Sinabi ng Department of Health kanina, ayaw nilang baguhin daw yung mga protocols. But in the meantime, the commissioner is saying na you might be open to easing some of the restrictions. Kumusta na po yung discussion doon in the COMELEC?
Well, Ma'am Ami, yung context nung sinabi ni Commissioner Inting yan, I think that was yesterday, she said, if the appropriate health authorities ease up on the guidelines, then we will ease up on the guidelines as well. I think kaya po na hingan ng komento yung Department of Health dyan kasi, kumbaga, sinabit nung commissioner namin yung konteksto nung aming pag-i-ease doon sa possible movements sa mga polisiya na ibinababa ng IATF at DOH.
So the health experts will have the last say?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Tama naman po siguro yun.
O hindi tatanggalin yung face shield, nandun pa rin yung requirement na yun.
Yes,
for rallies lang naman, di ba? Nandun pa rin yung requirement na yun.
And for election day po.
For the voting day.
Yes po.
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Minado naman ako dun I do remember that part of the COMELEC resolution that states the requirement for a face shield dun sa election activities. Pero at the same time, I do remember there's also a proviso there subject to decisions or requirements by the IATF based on the alert level system So,
tama po yan.
So
that's why kasi po sa IATF yung face shields are voluntary at alert level 2 and better, no?
Okay.
At alert level 3 and 4 3 4 5 ata mandatory na yan. But
Okay.
also in the same guidelines the IATF adverts to the authority of persons and organizations with specific with specific under specific circumstances, no? Just like hospitals, for example. Hospital says wear a face shield, kahit na alert level 1 ka, mag-face shield ka talaga. And in our case, dito sa mga events na ginagalawan ng maraming tao, na nagkakadikit-dikit ng mga tao, COMELEC, I think, has authority to say na for our collective safety, this is what we need to do.
So walang pag-asa kahit yung sa selfie, kasi lahat ng kandidato yun ang gusto eh. Pagbigyan nyo naman daw sila for the selfies.
Well, ang advice ko po sa kanila is can they please put that in writing so that matakal namin formally dito sa NBank, no? Yung mga commissioners, matakal ng mga commissioners formally sa NBank. That way, mabigyan sila ng buong sagot, di ba? Mahirap po kasi yung ganito lang.
But you are open to suggestions.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Even nga dito sa issue ng private property and treatment of private property, we're not averse. Yes, ma'am.
But in the meantime, I will ask again, anong parusa sa violation? In the meantime that the rules are in place.
Sa ngayon, ma'am, again, I think to maiwasan na lang natin yung issue ng private property.
Yung sa health protocols during
health protocols, face mask, face shield po sa campaigns, face mask, face shield para sa election day.
Anong parusa for the violators in the meantime that the rules are enforced?
In the meantime po, it's considered an election offense. Pero syempre range of penalties naman yan. No, it can be in many cases nga ngayon parang admonition lang ang ginagawa natin. But in cases where paulit-ulit yung violation or deliberate yung violation, then posibleng may kulong, may multa, and even disqualification in the extreme cases.
Motu proprio ba kayo or do you need a complainant?
Pwede pong motu proprio.
Okay.
Pero, sir, sorry sir, pero magmula ng February 8, wala pa nakitang kandidato naka-face shield.
Yeah.
Meron naman.
Wala pa, sir. kung meron man, paminsan-minsan siguro, pero sa mga footage namin parati, nakikita ko, wala na, minsan nga, walang mask eh.
Yung mga ganyan po, nire-refer natin sa regional COMELEC campaign committee at sila po yung best suited para mag-evaluate ng possible violation at magsabi kung anong gagawin.
Kasi baka maubusan tayo ng kandidato bago mag-eleksyon.
Oo nga eh. At what point kaya kayo? At what point kayo mag-umpisang mag-impose ng parusa?
Oo.
Kasi yun ang iniintay ng mga tao eh. Kailan nyo ba parurusahan to? Kaya hindi tumitigil eh. Wala namang napaparusahan.
Ang problema, ma'am, yung mga nagsasabi niyan, tahimik sila pagdating sa kandidato nilang ginagawa yung same thing. Di ba sinabi nyo, wala kayong nakikitang sumusunod. Ibig sabihin, lahat nagpa-violate.
Lahat.
And ibig sabihin, lahat ng maingay ngayon, yung sinusuportahan nila, nagpa-violate pa rin. So bakit hindi nila simulan yung kandidato nila? Actually, ang worry ko is not maubusan tayo ng kandidato, baka maubusan tayo ng tao. Diba? I mean, if they're so cavalier about all of this, the next surge is waiting around the corner. And ultimately, what are we gonna attribute it to? Na gusto ko magpa-selfie?
Okay, gusto ko magpa-selfie. Ganun ang ending niya. Okay. COMELEC spokesman, Director James Jimenez, sir, maraming salamat for joining us tonight at ingat po parati.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Salamat po.
That'll be all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what we discuss here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Edwin Gao.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star and we are One News.